Hi, David. Where are we going today?
Well, let's go back in time, Bjorn. Have you ever read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea?
Absolutely. I was binging on all the Jules Verne books at one point.
Great. And you know, Captain Nemo, the submarine captain in that story, entertained visitors on the mysterious island, another Jules Verne book. Captain Nemo told his visitors that water will be the fuel of the future.
Wow. That almost sounds like something a wizard would say. But don't you think Jules went a little bit too far over the edge with that one?
Actually, no. Stay tuned and I'll tell you why.
Drank my wine, me and my magic man kind of feeling fine.
What if I told you that Jules Verne predicted it accurately? It actually happened. Water became a fuel in Ohio in the 1980s. The story is true, awesome, and contained in the following video excerpt from a 1995 documentary. Pay attention to the comments of Dr. Paul Cease. I communicated with him about the year 2000 when I was doing my research for NASA. It was a pleasant surprise to see his comments. When the documentary concludes, we will present some brief technical insights from the inventor's patents.
All right, let's watch this.
Remember, there was a video that was circulating many years ago about a guy who created a car that runs on water. And then this car that ran on water, I mean, he apparently had a viable engine and it was really working. And then he had a heart attack. And as he was dying, he was saying, "They killed me. They killed me." And then he died. Nobody heard from the water engine again. Meyer said that his invention could do what physicists say is impossible, turn water into hydrogen fuel efficiently enough to drive his dune buggy cross-country on 20 gallons straight from the tap. Wow. He took a sip of cranberry juice, then he grabbed his neck, bolted out the door, dropped to his knees, and vomited violently. I ran outside and asked him what's wrong. His brother Stephen Meyer recalled. He said, "They poisoned me." That was his dying declaration.
I think there's a strong possibility that we're at a turning point in history, a complete revolution in human affairs, with the discovery of totally new energy sources. Many people are skeptical of this, but I think we may be going through the 4 stages involved in any revolutionary development. 1, it's nonsense, don't waste my time. 2, oh, it's interesting but not important. 3, I always said it was a good idea. And 4, I thought of it first.
Can you imagine what it would be like if you could split water and run it into your engines? You could put water in your fuel tank to fly airplanes, power stations.
Ordinarily, we look at water to drink and to wash our clothes. Today, you have to look at water as a fantastic new fuel source.
A world powered by water might seem like a dream, a pure fantasy. But 100 years ago, that is exactly what the men of steam would have thought about a world powered by oil.
Well, it was during the oil embargo of the United States. It alarmed me that a little country over in the Far East could actually cripple the United States. And realizing that the entire industrial base of the United States and the world is based on the supply and the utilization of energy, it became imperative that we must try to bring in an alternate fuel source and do it very quickly. Of course, I thought originally with the right type of funding, we could possibly get it in within 6 months. But reality shows that the 12 to 15 years was more correct in its projection.
Back in the 70s, Stan Meyer set out single-handedly to solve America's energy problems. He decided to do it using water, the world's most abundant storehouse of hydrogen, which is a far more powerful fuel than oil. For 15 years, Meyer has been fighting to get his inventions taken seriously.
Most inventors have to be a loner. You have to be somewhat thick-skinned and don't rely on other people to support you, because they will not. More times than not, an invention is really stolen from the inventors. Even in my prior development of high technology, I've had patents taken from me. I learned from the School of Hard Knocks to be very cautious.
Meyer has always stood out against the crowd. He has no formal qualifications as a scientist because he didn't wait to graduate from high school, leaving early to go straight into research at the high-powered Battelle Institute in his native Ohio. Now he works full-time as a private inventor. He's built a device with potentially revolutionary implications. There is nothing startling about a machine that can extract the hydrogen from water. What is highly unusual is that it should do so with ordinary tap water. The conventional method is called electrolysis. Meyer has turned that process on its head. Unlike electrolysis, his device doesn't use up large amounts of electric current, nor does it produce an enormous amount of waste heat. For 20 years, he has been refining a method to fracture water, which produces vast amounts of hydrogen on demand. This is not his latest apparatus. He was unwilling to let us point a camera at that. This is the simple device he used to convince a reluctant patent office that his revolutionary concept actually works. Alloy rods, acting as electrodes, are housed in a perspex container that's filled with water. Normal mains voltage is fed in through a transformer, but critically, there is virtually no current consumed, less than half an amp. The result is dramatic. Hydrogen pours off with the flick of a switch. Meyer claims the key is his electronics, which pulses electricity rapidly across the rods at up to 20,000 cycles per second. In a way that's not readily apparent, this process transforms the equation. Whereas in conventional electrolysis, 3 times as much energy is consumed as is produced in the form of hydrogen fuel, in Meyer's apparatus, the reverse is true. It appears to produce several hundred% more energy than it consumes.
Stan has something that's characteristic of the people that sound like they've done something to tap zero-point energy. Has high frequency, high voltage, and there's a combination of the two at which something occurs. With Chernetsky in Russia, it was what he called a self-sustaining discharge. The tube would run by itself. When Stan gets this effect, the amount of hydrogen and oxygen that are emitted off these 2 electrodes is a step function. It almost boils the water. If I did this with standard electrochemicals, I need current, and the water should rise a degree every couple of seconds. With Stan's, it'll run for a half hour, and the water temperature hasn't changed. Something's different.
Meyer demonstrates this repeatedly without any difficulty. and yet on the face of it, it represents an extraordinary revolution. His measurements over the years suggest 1700% greater efficiency than conventional electrolysis. And if he's to be believed, he's getting much better results from his latest, still secret invention.
Well, I first got involved with Stan Meyer when I went over there with a couple of colleagues to look at his water-splitting device. And so we arrived at Stanley Meyer. He had a demonstration cell. We filled it with tap water. In fact, I did that myself. And he switched it on, and almost instantly there were 3 jaws dropped because of the rate at which the gas poured off. It was quite spectacular.
Whatever energy source Stan Meyer had tapped, it was not explicable by the electric power that was going into it. So something was powering it outside of conventional wisdom.
There is no question that the gas coming off in such abundance is hydrogen. Meyer ignites it to produce a high-temperature flame able to cut through metal.
Stanley Meyer has faced a lot of difficulties. He's 3 times tried to launch the device and produce press conferences, had the technical press round, but he's been almost universally slated. In the early days, very much so, they just ridiculed the whole idea. He's getting a little more notice now because some scientists are getting interested. But by and large, science is very intolerant, particularly modern science.
As with Tesla, Griggs and others, Meyer's claims are so far outside the received scientific wisdom that they've been ignored by the majority of the scientific establishment. But then, Meyer has ignored them too. He has poured his energies over the last 10 years into establishing recognition for his claims by getting international patents.
In the processing, there was a great deal of difficulty in trying to process the legal paperwork in such a way as to allow the Patent Office to fully understand what was actually occurring. In one instant, we brought the water fuel cell to Washington, D.C., and of course I had tweaked it in such a way to produce an enormous amount of hydrogen and oxygen gas, and the patent examiner said, no, it will not work based on the electrolysis process. And when we turned it on and produced an enormous amount of hydrogen and gas, the examiner finally realized that we were doing exactly that, and went out in the hallway and started screaming and hollering to everybody on the floor, put out all your cigarettes, hydrogen's in the building. So we started laughing and said, well, we certainly convinced everybody in the patent office that we can do what we said we can do.
Even so, the US Patent Office dragged their feet for 3 years before granting patents on the hydrogen-producing device. Since then, against massive resistance, he's managed to get patents established throughout Europe and Japan. But the hydrogen machine was only the first step towards Meyer's ultimate dream. If he gets it right, this application of his technology would change the 21st century in the same way that the Wright brothers and Carl Benz transformed the 20th. He is currently modifying a beach buggy to run on nothing but water. It doesn't have a petrol tank or even a hydrogen container. It has just a tank of water. He's invented a device called a water splitter to replace the spark plug. As the water is injected into the engine, Meyer claims it's fractured into hydrogen and oxygen and then burned as fuel. Meyer is working on a kit to modify any engine. He hopes to demonstrate it on this car within 12 months.
And of course, the blessing to the use of the water as a fuel source, that on combustion, the byproduct is water mist. So we're even solving the environmental pollution problem at the same time that we're using water to maintain the industrial basis of the world.
Meyer is protective about his inventions to the point of self-confessed paranoia. Most observers describe him as a crank and his car as an aberration. But then madness and genius often go hand in hand. Meyer shares with many inventors a problem that goes well beyond paranoia. As an engineer with no scientific background, he faces a giant hurdle when he tries to communicate with scientists.
One problem is that the language that people use when they're trying to describe their inventions is not the language that I as a scientist am used to, and so I have to translate it, if you like, into a way that I can begin to understand what they're trying to say. It might as well be written in Swahili for all of the sense that it initially makes, and so I'm not particularly inspired to put a lot more effort in the hope that the pearl of wisdom will reveal itself to me. At a certain point you hit a law of diminishing returns.
It isn't just a question of the difficulties of communication. There is a profound barrier between scientists and inventors, and a strong reluctance on the part of most scientists to risk their reputations grappling with issues that don't have a clear scientific pedigree.
Reluctance to look foolish inhibits a lot of people from looking at things. This is looked at as a pariah. You touch it, and it creates an image of you that you don't want your colleagues to see.
At one extreme, you might have things that are guaranteed to work but are not very interesting if they do, and at the other extreme, things that are a real long shot but would be revolutionary. And so you have to try and weigh the balance and decide which side is more likely to be profitable for you. Then, having made some choices, you then have to ask yourself, how do I actually go about doing this? Do I have to apply for funds to do it? And if I do, who will I be competing with? And what is the better chance that this will be supported or that? Because, at least in the big science area that I work, you can't just sort of come up with an idea on a Friday and expect to start the experiment on a Saturday. It takes many months, many years even, of preparation.
But though the scientific establishment may have ignored the likes of Meyer, the powerful military-industrial complex certainly hasn't. Over the past 10 years, Meyer says he's been quietly approached by many influential organizations who would never admit publicly to their involvement with him.
It is involved in deep space exploration, and it's also being developed quite highly in the military. Basically, what occurred with water fuel cell was in the fact that once they understood was actually occurring, then under the U.S. national security mandate, I have no decision or power of whether or not the military or NASA or the federal government will utilize the technology. They can utilize it in any way they so desire.
NASA is using every method it can to regain some of its now fading glory. In the face of strong congressional resistance, the days of limitless budgets for space exploration have long since gone. As the champion of a new, environmentally friendly energy source, NASA would gain immense support.
Your identification, please. You have your identification?
As a former top scientist of the NASA spaceplane project, Professor Paul Ziss has an inside track on the workings of the agency.
NASA has large centers. The center that's in charge of propulsion is NASA Lewis in Cleveland, Ohio. Can you imagine, instead of having a million-pound rocket has 900,000 pounds of fuel on board, an oxidizer. Can you imagine what it would be like if you could put a device on there that would split water and run it into your engines? No explosive compounds.
Public confirmation of a contract from NASA would provide a resounding boost for Mars technology. But Paul Ziss says it's only in a closed meeting they confirm such an agreement.
They're looking for new energy sources. I understand from the people that I've talked with that they have worked with Stan and tried to understand what he's done and given him a contract. I also understand with the bureaucracy in Washington and the congressional oversight as to why they would never admit it. Anyone that does that will be suspect, will be challenged, will be considered a threat.
But if only a fraction of what Meyer claims for his technology can be achieved, it would represent a vindication for NASA's involvement. It would also be a powerful threat to many entrenched vested interests.
If Stan Meyer's device works like he advertises, you would make energy available universally almost free. That is a major, major, major impact.
When new technology comes in existence, there's a great resistance to it because it can affect a lot of economic factors. In this particular case in the United States, we pay out roughly about $200 billion a year for foreign oil. It's quite obvious that the Arabs would pay $200 billion to try to keep this type of technology out of the economy. And many times over the last decade, I have been offered enormous amounts of money to simply sell out or to sit on it. The Arabs offered me well over $1 billion cold cash simply to sit on and do absolutely nothing with it. My life has been threatened many times. Of course, I happen to believe in the power of angels. And if I don't believe in the power of angels, I don't believe I'll be around here too long.
If the thing like Stan Meyer has works, every piston engine, every gas turbine in the world today, if it had its converter, could run on it. With a little invention, we could get standalone devices to run all over the world. I think it would be what I would be concerned about is the people that sell energy would be essentially bankrupted. It's what happened to the Conestoga wagons when trains came, or to the Pony Express when the telegraph came in. They're going to wipe out an entrenched power base, and they may not go easily.
Wow, David, what an exciting possibility that opens up. You know, I've always dreamt of being able to drive a car that was powered by water.
Yes, Bjarne, and you heard what Paul C. said at the end about the forces that don't want to allow this kind of revolutionary energy technology to be available. We highly recommend that our viewers watch our videos number 11, 12, and 13 based on Dr. Peter Lindemann's teachings on why we do not have infinite energy available to us yet.
Absolutely. That's always good to keep in mind in the background, but sticking to what we just watched though, David, I know you have looked deeper into Stan Meyer and his work, and I want to know more. So what have you found out?
You know, all of Meyer's patents are all expired, but they are available to read online. We're not going to go too deep into it right now. But even though they do touch upon it in the video, I really want to point out the extreme difference between electrolysis and the Meyer process. Electrolysis requires something to be dissolved in the water to carry current. That creates much heat and is therefore very inefficient. On the other hand, Meyer's technology used a water-filled capacitor. So it looked very much like this. These are two stainless steel tubes I bought at a local hardware store. The small one fits inside the big one, but there's still a gap between the two. He used spacers so that it would not short out. And then he applied a voltage, like one polarity to the outside of the big tube and the other polarity to the smaller diameter tube, and they're not shorted. So he basically made a capacitor with water as the insulator between the two metal electrodes. And tap water is perfect for that because it's not a good conductor. So he applied that voltage, and then he applied a sequence of ascending voltage which literally pulled the water molecules apart into their separate hydrogen and oxygen atoms. Using voltage and not current was why the Meyer process was so efficient.
And you actually saw him speak one time, David?
Yes, it was at a free energy conference. But more importantly, one of my contacts went to a Meyer demonstration in Ohio and actually witnessed the process in action. The apparatus was producing hydrogen for quite a while, and then when it was over, he felt the outside of the water-filled cylinder, and it was still cold to the touch. If the hydrogen had been produced with electrolysis, it would have been quite hot.
You know, this is yet another thing of these things that I feel like needs to be resurrected. You know, at least I hope it will be. And if some of our viewers want to look into this, David, what would you recommend they do?
Well, before they do, let me make one very important point here. One of the Meyer patents focuses on safety features, and for good reason. Hydrogen is still hydrogen. So preventing a flashback into the apparatus is important. And if anyone wants to experiment with this, you must make sure you prevent hydrogen igniting in the wrong places. This could create explosions and be very dangerous. In fact, reading all of his patents, there's about 13 or so, is highly recommended for those interested in experimenting with this technology.
Good to keep in mind. David, thank you for bringing this whole thing to our attention. From Captain Nemo to Stan Meyer, we're covering quite the distance, both in time and space. So where are you taking us next?
Well, Bjorn, I don't know right now. Many ideas are arriving simultaneously. But in any case, it will be exciting. So stay tuned and see you next video.